Nobody was laughing when the mercury dropped to 30 below zero. But they were all laughing when Elara first brought her 42 molting geese to the farm. They cackled in the barn and smirked over the dinner table, their amusement a sharp, cold thing that settled in her bones long before the winter did. The laughter felt like a prophecy of failure, a chorus of voices certain of her foolishness. Yet, by the time the first real blizzard hit, a silence had fallen over the valley, a quiet so profound it was broken only by the whisper of falling snow and the distant, triumphant honk of a goose, safe and warm in its insulated shed. The laughter had frozen on their lips, and all that remained was the cold, hard truth of what she had known all along. The confrontation began, as it so often did, in the pristine, oversized kitchen that Beatrice, her fiancé's mother, treated as a throne room. Elara was wiping down the granite countertops, the scent of lemon and ammonia sharp in the air, when Beatrice entered, a crisp manila folder in her hand. Julian trailed behind her, his handsome face set in a look of pained apology that Elara had come to recognize as a prelude to capitulation. He wouldn't meet her eyes, focusing instead on a spot on the stainless steel refrigerator, as if its polished surface held the answers he lacked the courage to voice himself. Beatrice laid the folder on the counter with a sharp snap that made Elara jump. "Elara, darling," she began, her voice syrupy but cold, like honey poured over ice. "We need to have a serious discussion about your hobby." Elara's hands stilled. She knew what was coming. It had been building for months, a low thunder of disapproval on the horizon of their lives. Her geese, her 42 loud, messy, perpetually shedding geese. "They're not a hobby, Beatrice. They're livestock." "Livestock produces something of value," Beatrice countered, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on the folder. "Meat. Eggs in a quantity that matters. Your birds just wander around, shedding feathers and making a dreadful mess by the pond. They are an eyesore and, frankly, an embarrassment." Julian finally spoke, his voice aimed at the floor. "Honey, Mom's right. We're trying to build a brand here. Thorn Farms is about modern, efficient agriculture. We have investors coming next week. A flock of mangy-looking geese doesn't fit the image." "They're not mangy. They're molting," Elara said, her voice quiet but firm. "It's their natural cycle." It was a specific, heavy molt, the kind that produced the down her grandmother had prized above all else. A treasure hidden in plain sight, disguised as mess and decay. Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, devoid of any humor. "It's a cycle of uselessness. I've spoken to a man from the county. He can come and remove them. Humanely, of course." She slid the folder towards Elara. It contained a single printed quote for poultry removal services. 42 units. The words felt like an execution order. Elara felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Julian, a desperate plea in her eyes. He was the man who had claimed to love her, who had admired her connection to the land, her quiet strength. But the man standing before her now was a stranger, a hollowed-out version of himself, reflecting his mother's cold ambition. He just shrugged, a small, helpless gesture that severed something deep inside her. "This is a modern farm, Elara, not a pauper's hovel," Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the silence. The words were designed to wound, to diminish her, to remind her of the simple, rural background she came from, a world away from the Thorn family's manicured lawns and inherited wealth. "Those birds are as useless as you are." The phrase hung in the air, glittering with malice. It was the distillation of every slight, every condescending smile, every backhanded compliment she had endured since moving to the farm. Useless. That was what they saw when they looked at her. A decorative, compliant accessory to their grand plans, as disposable as the molting geese she so foolishly cherished. The farmhands, mucking out the stables just outside the open kitchen door, fell silent. They had heard. Elara could feel their pity and their embarrassment on her behalf. The public nature of the humiliation was a calculated move, designed to corner her, to leave her with no room to argue. She felt a hot flush of shame creep up her neck, but beneath it, something else stirred, a cold, hard kernel of anger, small and dense as a frozen seed. She didn't cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She looked from Beatrice's triumphant smirk to Julian's cowardly gaze, and then down at the folder. She pushed it back across the counter. "I need some time to think," she said, her voice barely a whisper but steady. "You have until the end of the week," Beatrice declared, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. "The investors will be here then, and the geese will be gone." Elara nodded silently, turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the scent of lemon and cruelty behind her. She didn't go to her room to weep. She walked straight to the small, weathered shed at the far edge of the property, the one place that was truly hers. As she approached, the geese began to honk, a chorus of welcome that sounded for the first time like a war cry. She pushed open the door, the familiar earthy smell of hay and birds enveloping her. In the corner, on a small, sturdy shelf, sat a worn, leather-bound journal. It was time to remember who she was. The journal smelled of her grandmother, dried lavender, old paper, and determination. Elara ran her fingers over the embossed cover, the leather softened by decades of use. It was the only thing of real value her grandmother Maeve had left her, aside from the geese themselves. Inside, the pages were filled with Maeve's spidery, elegant script, a chronicle of a life lived in tune with the seasons, a life that understood a different kind of wealth. She sat on an overturned bucket, the low afternoon sun slanting through the dusty window pane, and began to read. The memories came flooding back, not as gentle waves, but as a powerful, cleansing tide. She remembered being a small child, trailing Maeve through the fields, her small hand lost in her grandmother's calloused one. Maeve never spoke down to her. She spoke of the world as a series of interconnected secrets, waiting to be understood by those patient enough to watch and listen. "Most people see a weed, Elara," Maeve had told her once, pointing to a patch of dandelions. "They see a nuisance, but I see a salad for supper, a wine for winter, and a medicine for an upset stomach. It's not what it is. It's what you know about it that matters." That was the core of Maeve's philosophy. Knowledge was the ultimate currency. And her knowledge of the Silverdown geese was encyclopedic. They weren't just any geese. They were a rare breed her family had cultivated for generations, birds that had survived famine and harsh winters in the old country because of one unique trait, their spectacular biannual molt. Elara turned the pages, her fingers tracing the detailed drawings of feather structures. Maeve had been a meticulous record keeper. She had noted the exact weight of the down collected from each goose every season for 30 years. She had recorded the daily temperatures, the type of feed, and the effect on the quality of the down. It was less a farmer's journal and more a scientific treatise. "The Silverdown's undercoating," Maeve wrote, "is not like that of a common Emden or Toulouse. The barbules are finer, more numerous, creating a microscopic web of air pockets that provides an insulation value nearly double that of any other breed. They call it eiderdown of the fields. It is nature's perfect blanket." The memories deepened. Elara recalled the harvesting days. They weren't violent or cruel. They never plucked the geese. Instead, they would wait for the molt to begin, when the geese would naturally shed their thick winter undercoat. Maeve would walk among them, calm and slow, and the geese, comfortable in her presence, would allow her to gently gather the down directly from their bodies, plucking it from where it hung loose. The rest they would collect from the nesting boxes and the ground. It was a gift, freely given. "You must respect the animal, Elara," Maeve's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if she were standing right there. "You take only what it offers. That is the agreement. We give them shelter and food. They give us warmth. It is a partnership, not a tyranny." This was the world she came from, a world of quiet dignity, of symbiotic relationships, of a wealth that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. And she had traded it, or tried to, for Julian's world of superficial charm and bottom-line calculations. She had fallen for his easy smile and the grand vision he painted of their future. He had spoken of loving her for her authenticity, her earthiness. But she saw now that he had seen those qualities as quaint accessories, not as the core of her being. They were things to be displayed when convenient and discarded when they became an embarrassment. The red flags were there all along, scattered like the very feathers Beatrice despised. There was the time he'd laughed when she'd meticulously darned one of his favorite sweaters, telling her it was sweet, but that he could just buy a new one. There was the way his eyes would glaze over when she spoke of her grandmother's remedies for sick animals, his impatience a palpable thing in the air. He had wanted the aesthetic of a farm girl, not the reality of one. He wanted a woman who looked good in a sundress holding a basket of perfect store-bought apples, not a woman with dirt under her nails and the scent of hay in her hair. And she, in her desperate desire to be loved, to fit into his polished world, had allowed her own light to dim. She had kept the journal hidden. She had never spoken of the true value of the silver-down flock. She had wanted to be chosen for herself alone, a foolish, romantic notion that now felt painfully naive. How had she been so blind? Julian and his mother didn't value things they couldn't understand. They didn't understand her, so they couldn't value her. The geese were just a proxy for their deeper disdain. She turned to the back of the journal, to a section she hadn't looked at in years. It was filled with figures, names, and addresses. It was Maeve's ledger. For decades, her grandmother had sold the Silverdown down to a small, exclusive clientele. Artisans in the city who crafted bespoke duvets and coats for the wealthy, mountaineers who needed the best insulation for their expeditions, and even a company that supplied Arctic researchers. The prices made Elara's breath catch in her throat. The down was sold by the ounce, and its value was astronomical. A single goose in a good season could produce enough down to be worth hundreds of dollars. 42 geese. The numbers swam before her eyes. The flock wasn't just a flock. It was a gold mine, a renewable resource of incredible value. And Julian and Beatrice wanted to pay someone to haul it away like garbage. The anger she had felt in the kitchen returned, no longer a small seed, but a towering ancient tree, its roots digging deep into the soil of her heritage. The insult wasn't just against her. It was against Maeve, against generations of quiet wisdom. It was an assault on the very idea that value could exist outside of their narrow, materialistic worldview. But there was something else in the back of the journal, tucked into a leather flap. It was a folded yellow document. Elara carefully unfolded it. It was a copy of a loan agreement between Thorn Farms and the regional bank, dated 15 years ago. The farm had been on the brink of collapse after Julian's father had made a series of bad investments. The bank had refused to extend any more credit. And then she saw it. The co-signer on the loan, the one who had put up the collateral that saved the entire operation, was Maeve. Her grandmother, with her small, self-sufficient plot of land, and her flock of useless geese had saved them. She had leveraged her own property, the very land where Elara's sheed now stood, to secure the future of the man her granddaughter would one day love. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she read the fine print, her finger tracing the dense legal language. And then she found the clause. Section 11, subsection B, a standard but often overlooked cosigner protection clause. It stated that in the event of the primary borrower taking on significant new debt that altered the farm's debt-to-equity ratio without the cosigner's written consent, the original loan would be considered in technical default. In such an event, the cosigner, or their heir, would have the first right of refusal to assume the entirety of the farm's mortgage and assets by settling the outstanding balance, the new investors. The massive loan Julian and Beatrice were planning to finalize at the end of the week, they weren't just getting rid of her geese. They were about to hand her the entire farm. They thought she was useless. They thought her inheritance was a joke. They had no idea that the quiet, unassuming woman they were trying to cast aside held the key to their entire empire. The trap wasn't for her. It was for them. And they were walking into it with smug, arrogant smiles on their faces. Elara closed the journal, a profound calm settling over her. The hurt was still there, a dull ache beneath her ribs, but it was now overlaid with something else, a cold, clear sense of purpose. Beatrice had given her until the end of the week. It was more than enough time. She stood up, brushed the dust from her jeans, and walked out of the shed. The geese gathered around her, their soft honks a murmur of encouragement. She looked at them, not as a burden or a hobby, but as her army, her silent, feathered, 42-strong army, and she knew exactly what she had to do. The first step was to confirm the legality of what she had discovered. The name of Maeve's lawyer was in the journal, a Mr. Henderson in the nearby town. She prayed he was still practicing. A quick search online revealed he was, though his firm was small, a quiet, 2-room office above the town's bakery. The next morning, she told Julian she was going into town to run errands and clear her head, a story he accepted with a relieved smile, no doubt assuming she was preparing to surrender. The smell of fresh bread filled the staircase leading up to Mr. Henderson's office. He was an old man with kind, watery eyes behind thick spectacles and a tweed jacket that had seen better decades. He remembered Maeve instantly. "Maeve Vance," he said, a fond smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Now there was a woman who knew her own mind, sharp as a tack and tougher than a $2 steak. "How is she?" "She passed away 2 years ago," Elara said softly. His face fell. "I'm so sorry to hear that, my dear. A great loss. She was one of a kind. What can I do for her granddaughter?" Elara took a deep breath and laid the journal and the copy of the loan agreement on his wide, cluttered desk. She told him everything. She told him about Julian and Beatrice, about the ultimatum, about the geese, and about the clause she had found. She spoke calmly and factually, pushing the emotion down, just as Maeve had taught her. "A clear head makes a steady hand," she used to say. Mr. Henderson listened intently, his fingers steepled under his chin. He read the loan document twice, then a third time, his brow furrowed in concentration. He picked up the phone and made a call to a contact at the county records office, speaking in a low, confidential tone. He then made another call to a colleague who specialized in agricultural finance. When he finally hung up, he looked at Elara, and his watery eyes were sharp and clear. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman," he said, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "This document is ironclad. The land she put up as collateral, the parcel you inherited, was never formally released from the lien, because the loan was never fully paid off, just serviced. The Thorns have been refinancing and rolling their debt over for years. He leaned forward. The clause is exactly as you interpreted it. It's an old-style covenant, designed to protect a guarantor from being exposed to reckless new borrowing. Most modern loans don't have them, but this was drafted 15 years ago. The bank's current officers might not even be aware of it. If they proceed with this new loan for their agritourism venture without your signature, which, as Maeve's heir, is now required, they will trigger an immediate technical default. And I would have the right to assume the mortgage? Elara asked, her heart hammering. You would. Provided, he added, raising a cautionary finger, you can secure the funds to pay the outstanding balance. We're talking about a significant amount of money, Elara. The original loan was substantial. This was the next piece of the puzzle. Elara opened the journal again to the ledger in the back. She showed him the sales records for the Silver Down, the list of exclusive clients, and the prices. Then she showed him the final entry, a note from Maeve written just a month before she died. It detailed a separate bank account, a trust she had set up years ago, funded by the profits from the Down. It was an investment account, managed by a firm in the city. The purpose of the fund, Maeve had written, was for a rainy day, or for a day when a wolf comes to the door dressed in sheep's clothing. Mr. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. He took down the account details and made another call. The conversation was brief. He listened, jotted down a figure on a notepad, and hung up. He stared at the number for a long moment, then slowly turned the pad around for Elara to see. The amount in the trust was staggering. Maeve had been not just a wise farmer, but a shrewd investor. The fund had grown exponentially over the years. It was more than enough to settle the Thorn farm's entire debt, with a considerable amount left over. Elara felt a wave of dizziness. She had been living like a poor relation, a charity case, walking on eggshells in a house that should have been, in part, hers by right of the woman who had saved it. All this time, she had held the power and she hadn't even known it. The wolf is at the door, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice shaking slightly, not with fear, but with the force of her own dawning power. Indeed it is, he replied, a grim smile on his face, and it seems to have mistaken a shepherdess for a lamb. So, what is our plan? For the next 2 hours, they built the strategy. It was a quiet, meticulous process. Mr. Henderson would handle the legal and financial side, preparing the official notices and communicating with the bank and Maeve's investment firm. Elara's role was simpler, and in a way, much harder. She had to go back to the farm and do nothing. She had to play the part of the defeated, heartbroken girl, allowing Julian and Beatrice to believe they had won. Let them get the new loan, Mr. Henderson advised. Let them sign the papers. Let them pop the champagne. The trap is no good if the quarry doesn't walk into it. We will act at the precise moment of their triumph. That will be the moment of their greatest vulnerability. The plan was set. The next phase required a level of acting Elara wasn't sure she possessed, but as she drove back to the farm, she thought of her grandmother's quiet strength, of the generations of women who had weathered storms far worse than this one. She thought of the geese, so placid on the surface, yet possessing a fierce, protective instinct. She could do this. She would be calm, she would be patient, and she would let their own greed be the architect of their downfall. The days that followed were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Elara played her part to perfection. She was quiet, withdrawn, and melancholic. She spent hours by the pond, sitting with her geese, making a show of her sorrowful farewell. Julian, seeing her subdued state, mistook it for acceptance. He became solicitous, treating her with a cloying, patronizing kindness that turned her stomach. "I know this is hard, honey," he said one evening, putting an arm around her as they stood on the porch. "But it's for the best. Once the new resort is built, we'll be set for life. We can buy you any kind of pet you want. A little dog, maybe." He truly didn't know her at all. He thought her connection to the geese was a childish affection, a whim that could be replaced with a different, more convenient pet. He could not comprehend that the geese represented her history, her strength, and her independence. Beatrice was less subtle. She radiated smug satisfaction. She bustled around the house, making plans for the investors' party, which was to be held on Friday evening to celebrate the finalization of the loan. She treated Elara with a dismissive pity, occasionally patting her on the arm and telling her she was being a very sensible girl. Every condescending word, every false gesture of sympathy only strengthened Elara's resolve. She felt like a coiled spring, gathering tension. She spent her evenings in the shed, not mourning but preparing. She meticulously cleaned and sorted the recently harvested down, packing it into airtight bags. She reread her grandmother's journal, absorbing not just the practical knowledge, but the philosophical wisdom contained within its pages. Patience, Maeve had written, is the hunter's greatest virtue. The foolish chase their prey. The wise wait for it to come to them. The day of the party arrived, a crisp, clear autumn day. The farm was abuzz with activity. Caterers set up tables on the grand flagstone patio, and a string quartet practiced in the corner of the living room. Beatrice was in her element, directing everyone with the authority of a field marshal. She cornered Elara in the hallway. "Now, darling," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "I want you to make an effort tonight. Wear that nice blue dress. Smile. Our investors are very important people. We can't have you moping about, casting a pall over the celebration." It was the final provocation, the last act of casual cruelty. They weren't just taking her flock. They were demanding she smile and applaud while they did it. They wanted her to be a willing, cheerful participant in her own erasure. "Of course, Beatrice," Elara said, her voice a perfect imitation of compliance. "I wouldn't dream of it." She went to her room and put on the blue dress. She looked at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back was not the same one who had wiped down the kitchen counters in tears just a few days ago. Her eyes were clear and steady. There was a new hardness in her jaw, a new straightness in her spine. She was Maeve's granddaughter, and the hunt was about to end. The party was as vapid and ostentatious as Elara had expected. Men in expensive suits and women in glittering dresses mingled on the patio, drinking champagne and making loud, artificial conversation. They spoke of market shares and capital gains, their voices a jarring counterpoint to the gentle evening sounds of the farm. Julian and Beatrice were the stars of the show, gliding through the crowd, accepting congratulations. Julian gave a speech, his voice booming with false confidence. He spoke of a new era for Thorn Farms, of a luxury agri-tourism destination that would be the jewel of the county. He painted a picture of success and prosperity, a future built on a mountain of debt he was about to sign for. He gestured to the pond at the edge of the lawn. "And as part of our modernization," he announced with a charming laugh, "we'll be getting rid of some of the more rustic elements of the old farm, including my fiancé's rather noisy flock of geese." A wave of polite laughter rippled through the crowd. Several people looked over at Elara with pitying smiles. She felt their condescension like a physical blow, but she held her head high and offered a small, tight smile of her own. She met Julian's eyes across the lawn. He gave her a little wink. a gesture of shared victory. He had no idea whose victory he was actually celebrating. The centerpiece of the evening was the official loan signing. The bank manager, a portly man named Mr. Gable, had arrived with a leather briefcase. He was set up at a large oak table in the formal dining room, the loan documents spread out like a feast. The main investors, a slick couple from the city, were present, their faces gleaming with avarice. Beatrice beckoned to Julian. "It's time," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Julian strode to the table, picking up the expensive fountain pen. This was his moment of triumph, the culmination of all his ambitions. He was about to secure his legacy. He looked at Elara, who stood quietly in the doorway, and his smile was a mixture of pride and pity. The poor, simple girl. He would take care of her, of course. She would have a comfortable life, even without her silly birds. He uncapped the pen. The room fell into a respectful hush. The only sound was the scratching of the pen on the thick, creamy paper as Julian signed his name with a flourish. He had just signed his own death warrant. Mr. Gable countersigned. Then the investors. It was done. Champagne corks popped. The room erupted in applause. Julian and Beatrice embraced, their faces flushed with victory. And in that exact moment, Elara stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice not loud but clear and sharp enough to cut through the celebratory din. The room fell silent again, this time with a confused, awkward energy. All eyes turned to her. Beatrice shot her a look of pure fury. What was she doing? Was she going to make a scene? "Mr. Gable," Elara said, ignoring everyone else and addressing the bank manager directly. "I believe there is another document that requires your attention." From behind her, Mr. Henderson stepped into the room. He was no longer the kindly, rumpled country lawyer. He wore a crisp, dark suit, and his expression was all business. In his hand, he carried a slim leather briefcase. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly, from celebration to apprehension. "Who is this?" Julian demanded, his voice tight with irritation. "This is my legal counsel," Elara said calmly. Mr. Henderson stepped up to the table and placed his briefcase on it. He opened it and produced a single, crisp document. He slid it across the polished wood to Mr. Gable. "This is a formal notice," Mr. Henderson announced to the room, informing the bank that by executing this new loan agreement, Thorn Farms, LLC has knowingly violated the terms of its primary mortgage agreement, dated October 14th, 15 years ago. Specifically, Section 11, Subsection B. A murmur went through the room. The investors exchanged nervous glances. Mr. Gable picked up the notice, his face paling as he read it. He began fumbling through his own briefcase, pulling out the farm's original mortgage file. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages. "This can't be right," Julian stammered, his bravado evaporating. "That loan was co-signed by Elara's grandmother. She's gone. The obligations and rights of that contract pass to her heir, Miss Elara Vance," Mr. Henderson said, his voice like chipping ice. "As the legal guarantor, her written consent was required for any new debt of this magnitude. You did not obtain it. Therefore, the farm is in technical default." Mr. Gable found the clause. He read it, his lips moving silently. He looked up, his face ashen. He looked at Julian, then at the investors, and finally at Elara. The silence in the room was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. It was the silence of a trap sprung, of a world turned upside down. And then the neutral authority delivered the killing blow. "He's right," Mr. Gable said, his voice a hoarse whisper that seemed to echo in the cavernous room. "The clause is clear. The loan is in default, and the guarantor has the first right to assume the mortgage." The silence shattered. Beatrice let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. Julian's face was a mask of disbelief, his complexion turning a blotchy, furious red. This is insane. She can't. She doesn't have the money. Mr. Henderson produced another document from his briefcase. It was a certified statement of funds from Maeve's trust, confirming Elara's ability to settle the entire outstanding debt. He placed it gently on top of the default notice. My client has already transferred the full settlement amount to an escrow account managed by my firm, he said. We are prepared to wire the funds to the bank upon your confirmation of the transfer of title. The farm, Mr. Thorne, and all its assets now belong to Ms. Vance. Julian stared at Elara, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He saw her now, not as the simple, compliant girl, but as the architect of his ruin. You planned this, he hissed, his voice venomous. You tricked me? Elara looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment she felt a pang of something, not pity but a sad nostalgia for the man she thought he was. But it passed, burned away by the memory of his casual cruelty. She finally spoke, her voice steady and calm, directed not at Julian but at his mother. Beatrice was leaning against the wall, her face a ghastly shade of white, her perfect party crumbling into ruin around her. Elara met her gaze. You said this wasn't a pauper's hovel, Beatrice, she said, her voice carrying the weight of every insult, every moment of condescension. You were right. It's my hovel now. And it seems my geese and I are not so useless after all. The callback landed like a physical blow. Beatrice flinched as if she'd been slapped. The investors, realizing they had been about to pour money into a venture controlled by a woman who clearly despised them, began backing away, grabbing their coats and heading for the door, their voices a low, angry buzz of fraud and misrepresentation. Julian lunged forward, not at Elara, but at the papers on the table, as if by destroying them he could undo what had been done. But Mr. Henderson was faster. He calmly gathered the documents and placed them back in his briefcase. Two of the caterer's burly staff, seeing the situation escalate, moved to stand between Julian and the table. It was over. The triumph had lasted less than 5 minutes. The rest was just the messy, ignominious fallout. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Mr. Henderson, with the efficiency of a seasoned predator, managed the transition. The bank, eager to avoid a lawsuit for their own oversight, processed the title transfer in record time. By Monday morning, Elara was the sole proprietor of Thorne Farms. Her first act was to request that Julian and Beatrice vacate the premises. They were given 24 hours to pack their personal belongings. There was shouting, and there were tears. Beatrice's full of rage and self-pity. Julian was eerily silent, a hollowed-out man, his charm and arrogance stripped away to reveal the weak, frightened core beneath. Elara didn't watch them leave. She had asked 2 of the farmhands to supervise their departure. She had no desire to witness their humiliation. Her victory was not about gloating. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming her own worth. The farmhands, who had been treated as little more than hired muscle by the Thornes, pledged their loyalty to her without hesitation. They had heard Beatrice's insult in the kitchen. They had seen Julian's casual cruelty. They respected Elara's quiet competence and her deep practical knowledge of the land. For the first time in years, they had a boss who knew the difference between a weed and a medicinal herb. The news of the takeover and the reasons behind it spread through the small rural community like wildfire. The investors Julian had courted were furious, and their threats of legal action against him for fraudulent misrepresentation quickly became a reality. An investigation into the farm's finances revealed a pattern of recklessness and deceit. Julian had been using the farm's assets as collateral for personal loans and high-risk stock market gambles. all while presenting a facade of prosperity. He and Beatrice were facing not just financial ruin, but potential criminal charges. Their social standing, which Beatrice had prized above all else, evaporated overnight. They became a cautionary tale, a symbol of hubris and greed. In the quiet of the big empty farmhouse, Elara found a letter she hadn't known existed. It was tucked into the back of her grandmother's journal in a sealed envelope addressed to her. She opened it with trembling hands. "My dearest Elara," Maeve's script began. "If you are reading this, it means the wolf has come to the door, and you have had to show your teeth. I'm sorry you had to face this, but I'm not sorry you had the strength to do so. I left you the means to protect yourself, not because I didn't trust you to make your own way, but because I know the world. Men like Julian's father, and perhaps like Julian himself, see the world as something to be conquered and consumed. They do not understand the quiet power of nurturing, of patience, of taking only what is offered. Your geese are a lesson. They appear common, even foolish to the undiscerning eye. But to those who know, they are a treasure beyond measure. You, my girl, are the same. Do not ever let anyone convince you that your quiet strength is a weakness. It is your anchor. This farm was built on hard work and respect for the land. It faltered when it fell into the hands of those who valued image over substance. Now, it is yours. Heal it. Make it whole again. Trust the knowledge in your hands and the wisdom in your heart. True wealth is not in gold, but in warmth on a cold night, a full belly, and a clear conscience. Live a life that gives you all three." Elara folded the letter, tears finally blurring her vision. They weren't tears of sadness, but of gratitude and release. She was not alone. Maeve's legacy was not just the farm or the money. It was this unshakable belief in her own worth. As a small act of mercy, a gesture her grandmother would have approved of, Elara instructed Mr. Henderson to set aside a small portion of the funds to cover Julian and Beatrice's initial legal fees and 3 months' rent on a small apartment in a town far away. It was a final severing. She would not be cruel, but she would not be a fool ever again. She was giving them a chance to start over, but they would do so with nothing but what they could carry. The consequences of their actions were their own to bear. Winter arrived early that year, and it came with a vengeance. An Arctic front swept down from the north, plunging the region into a deep freeze that shattered century-old records. The wind howled relentlessly, piling snow into monstrous drifts that blocked roads and isolated farms for weeks at a time. The power grid flickered and died. For many, it was a time of fear and hardship. For Thorn Farms, now simply Vance Farms, it was a time of vindication. Elara had spent the autumn preparing. Guided by her grandmother's journal, she had overseen the retrofitting of the barns and the farmhouse, using traditional insulation techniques. But her true secret weapon was the mountain of silver-down goose down she had harvested. Working with 2 of the farmhands' wives, who were skilled seamstresses, she started a small workshop in what had once been Beatrice's formal dining room. They began to produce the most incredible duvets, blankets, and coats. The down was so light and so efficient that a thin layer provided more warmth than the thickest wool or synthetic fills. She made sure every person on the farm had a silver-down duvet and a winter coat. While their neighbors shivered, huddled around wood stoves and burning through precious fuel, the residents of Vance Farms were warm and secure. The geese, her supposed folly, were now the saviors of the entire community. They spent the winter in their cozy, insulated shed, content and well-fed, oblivious to the storm they had armed everyone against. The farm itself began to heal. Elara, using the capital from Maeve's trust, paid off the most pressing debts and invested in sustainable long-term improvements. She planted winter cover crops to enrich the soil. She repaired the long-neglected fences and machinery. She ran the farm not as a showpiece, but as a living, breathing organism, treating it with the respect Maeve had taught her. The farmhands worked with a renewed sense of purpose, proud to be part of something real and honest. During the worst of the blizzard, a snowmobile appeared out of the whiteout. It was Liam, a neighboring farmer whose land bordered hers to the west. He was a quiet, hard-working man with kind eyes, a man she had occasionally exchanged pleasantries with but never really known. He had come to check on her, knowing she was alone in the big house. He was half frozen, his face raw from the wind. She brought him inside, sat him by the fire, and wrapped him in one of her silver-down blankets. He looked at it in amazement. "I've never felt anything so light and so warm," he said, his voice full of wonder. "It's the geese," she said with a small smile. He looked at her, a slow grin spreading across his face. "The geese," he repeated. "I remember Julian Thorne making fun of those birds at the feed store last summer. Called them your useless pets." He shook his head. "Looks like the fool was the one who was useless." Liam stayed for 2 days until the storm broke. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their families, their struggles, and their love for the land. He was a man who understood the language of the seasons, who saw value in things that couldn't be bought or sold. He looked at her not with pity or condescension, but with a deep and genuine admiration. He was impressed by her knowledge, her resilience, and her quiet strength. When he looked at her, she felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. When the roads were finally cleared, the story of Vance Farms and its miraculous warmth began to spread. A reporter from a regional newspaper stranded in the local town heard the rumors and came to investigate. He wrote a human interest story about the farm that survived the blizzard, all thanks to a flock of 42 molting geese and the forgotten wisdom of a grandmother. The story went viral. Elara was inundated with calls. High-end boutiques from the city, outdoor supply companies, and wealthy individuals all wanted to buy her silver-down products. The demand was overwhelming. She had stumbled into a niche, luxury market, not through a calculated business plan, but by simply staying true to her heritage. The small workshop in the dining room became a full-fledged business, employing several people from the local town who had lost their jobs during the hard winter. Vance Farms was not just surviving, it was thriving. A year passed. The farm was transformed. The fields were healthy, the finances were stable, and the business, silver-down comforts, was a resounding success. Elara had even started a small foundation in her grandmother's name, using a portion of the profits to provide grants for young farmers interested in sustainable and heritage agriculture. Her relationship with Liam had blossomed into a deep and loving partnership. It was a quiet, steady love, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared values. He never tried to change her. He celebrated her strength, sought her opinion, and loved her not in spite of her connection to her past, but because of it. One crisp autumn evening, they sat on the porch, wrapped in a shared blanket, watching the geese settle by the pond for the night. The farm was peaceful, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. "I heard some news in town today," Liam said softly. "Oh?" "About the Thorns. The trial is over. Julian got 2 years for fraud. Beatrice got probation, but they've lost everything. The settlement wiped them out completely. I heard she's working as a cashier at a discount store 2 counties over." Elara was silent for a moment, processing the final, pathetic end to their story. There was no triumph in it, no joy. Just a quiet, sad finality. They had grasped for so much, and in doing so, had been left with nothing. Their greed had not needed her help to destroy them. It had only needed her to step out of the way and let it run its course. She leaned her head on Liam's shoulder, a profound sense of peace settling over her. She had her grandmother's farm, a thriving business, the respect of her community, and the love of a good man. She had everything that mattered. She had learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of her life, that true value is often quiet, hidden in plain sight, dismissed by those who only see the world in dollars and cents. She learned that the world will call you foolish for cherishing what it cannot understand. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stop seeking validation from the unworthy, to trust the quiet knowledge passed down to you, and to let the fools laugh themselves into the cold. She was living the life she truly deserved, a life woven from the threads of the past, as strong, as light, and as warm as the down of a silver down goose.